Well, hello. It is the Political Spectrum, and we are back. We're back, man. It's been a couple months. It's been a while. But here we are. Like two best friends, reunited. Just you and me. Back here on the Political Spectrum together. And what a day to be back. It is November 4th. It is the evening of November 4th. It is Monday, the evening of November 4th. And it is election eve. Tomorrow, America decides. America votes. It's like, remember in, American Idol and those things. America decides. Text your vote for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. So that's happening tomorrow. And it's a big early voting year. It's election season now. That's what we do. It's like when you're getting ready for Christmas or something like this. Election season now begins, I don't know, like in October. And everybody's been voting for weeks. And I don't know what the exact numbers are, but something like a third or half of the votes have already been cast. This time, it appears, based on the early numbers, that they've been cast much more evenly, Republican and Democrat, whereas in previous years, what you would see would be the early votes are almost all entirely Democrats, and I don't know what that's going to mean, what that's going to show tomorrow, but that's not what we came here to talk about. I'll tell you what we came here to talk about, but before we do, I want to explain where I've been, what's been going on the last 2 months. You may notice that there is no video with this particular episode, and that's because I don't want to do the video anymore. And it's my show, so I can just do it the way I want to. I just don't want to. It was distracting to me when I was recording the shows, but also really distracting in the production of the shows. And as silly as it seems, I lost my rhythm on doing this thing for weeks and weeks and weeks, almost exclusively because of feeling the compulsion to have to do some sort of video podcast. Now, here's what I did learn, though. The other thing that brought me back. We synchronized the podcast uploads with YouTube's podcast platform, which does not include video. Weird, right? Because it's YouTube. So we were already uploading the videos to the Political Spectrum YouTube channel where you can find us and you can still see those videos. But separately, with our podcast provider, which we use Spotify, they're all the same, basically, as far as I know. That's what pushes the podcast to Stitcher or Apple Podcasts or whatever else. So they also push it to YouTube Podcasts, which publishes the podcast without video on the YouTube podcast platform. Hopefully this makes sense. What I learned was that these podcasts are actually doing great on the YouTube podcast platform without the video. And it's a lot easier to do. It's a lot less stress to do. And it's how I like it. I don't know about you, but when I listen to podcasts, or even when I watch them on YouTube, like this Joe Rogan, Donald Trump thing, I just listen to it. I like radio. I'm a radio guy, and that's what I like. So maybe my audience will like the same thing. I don't really know, but it does seem that our non-video transmissions to the universe are doing well. And maybe that's only just because YouTube was pushing it. I don't know. Here's the point. That's where I was. I'm back. Audio only, baby. Audio only. It's like we're on the phone, which I also don't like. I don't know what I do like. I used to like it. I don't like it. But I'll be on the phone with you, loyal TPS Nation, because you're the only people that I believe in. You're the only people that I think can save this country, whatever that means. I don't know if you've heard about this or not. Did anybody tell you this? This is the most consequential election in history. And because democracy is on the ballot, it's literally on the ballot. I voted, and on the ballot was democracy. It was just sitting there right on top of the ballot. I brushed it off and then my vote. And you probably find it on your ballot too. Just ignore it and just vote. What does that mean? What do they even mean by democracy? Nobody even knows. You know what democracy means? Democracy means my candidate. That's what they mean. Anytime you hear the word democracy, when a politician is saying it, at least in 2024, in this era, you could just substitute that with my power. And then it's really not all that consequential of a statement. When Democrats say Donald Trump will end democracy as we know it, what they're really saying is Donald Trump will end our power as we know it. When the Republicans say Kamala Harris, this will be the last election, Kamala Harris will end democracy, what they mean is Kamala Harris will end our power. Well, of course, that's how elections work. That's nothing new. We just came up with new, extra scary ways of saying it. Here's what this podcast is today. I am going to make a bold prediction. I'm doing the podcast today because it's a consequential day and because I want to say I was right after tomorrow happens. Because I think I know what's going to happen tomorrow. I could be wrong. But what's the fun of that? What's the fun of trying to hedge your bets? Make a bet, man. Pick a horse. Say what you think is going to happen. So I'm going to say what I think is going to happen. I'm going to make a bold prediction. And the title of this podcast is something along the lines of what I'm telling you right now, which is the 3 post-election talking points that everybody is going to be talking about. And I'm going to tell you about them now, the night before the election. And maybe this will be a credibility builder, like a prophet. So when they are talking about him, you could say, oh, J.J. Michaels. You know, he really does know what he's talking about. He really does. Anyway, we'll get into that in a second. There's a lightning storm outside here in central Texas where I live. And it's interesting because every time there's a bolt of lightning, I can see the voltage meter on my power conditioner dropping. It's not ever at 120. It's normally like 112. And then I see it dropping. It's like 108, 110. So if I lose you, I lose you, guys. I don't know what to tell you. I'm gonna do my best to get this show out. You ready to hear about the talking points that everybody's gonna be talking about? Ready to hear about all 3 of them? First, I'm gonna take a sip of my beverage, which is not a delicious cup of coffee made with my Breville coffee maker. No, it isn't. No, tonight. It's nighttime here. Tonight, it is a ranch water because Mrs. Michaels has been drinking these. And sometimes we get them and they're really gross. And sometimes we get them and they're really good. So I wanted to take a shot at making one at home for Mrs. M. I did it the other day. It was really good with fresh lime. And I squeezed it in the thing. And it turns out that we actually have a little juicer thing like real bartenders have. And I poured it into this crystal cup. And she has a theory that the cloudier... Do you not know what ranch water is, by the way? It's just very simple. It's lime juice, tequila, and soda, I think. That's what we think it is. If it's not that, I don't know. Write me an email or put a comment in the thing and say, JJ, you're an idiot. You don't even know. I think that's what it is. That seems that's what the bartenders are doing. Anyway, so we have a theory that if it's the cloudier it is, the better it is. Mine's really cloudy, and I got to tell you, it's really good. I think it's really good. Very limey, like a British sailor. And, of course, I'm drinking it out of a beautiful crystal glass. Could you hear that? That's ice. I don't know if you can hear it. All right. I put it off long enough. Ready? Boom. 3 talking points. Should I do one at a time or am I going to say all 3? I'm going to say all 3. I'm going to say all 3. Here are the 3 things that people are going to be talking about after the election. First of all, my prediction is that Trump is going to win. And my prediction is that he's going to win pretty convincingly. I think people are going to be surprised. So the 3 talking points are going to be discussing why he won, right? And they're going to be as follows. Talking point number 1. New media had its Kennedy-Nixon debate moment. I'm going to explain what these mean in a second. Talking point number 2. The vice presidential pick and debate was consequential. Talking point number 3. Incumbency has lost its power to the point that it's a reverse incumbency. So let's hit those backwards. Talking point number 3. The power of incumbency is no longer a power. It's an albatross, meaning that it's perhaps a disadvantage to be the incumbent. Talking point number 2. For this election cycle, the vice presidential picks mattered. Now, I predicted this with my first episode, titled, J.D. Vance will be the next president of the United States who has never been president of the United States before. That was when it was Trump and Biden still, by the way. So it was also kind of a joke because it's like whoever wins this one, J.D. Vance is winning the next one. We're going to talk about that. And circling back up to number 1, where we will begin our discussion is number 1, new media had its Nixon-Kennedy debate moment. What is the Nixon-Kennedy debate moment, and what am I referring to by new media? What I mean by new media is podcasts, mainly podcasts, social media, non-terrestrial radio, which is really just podcasts, YouTube, certainly. So that's what I'm talking about, my new media. And I really am specifically talking about long-form podcasts, of which, like the Joe Rogan show is the most famous, but it's not the only one. In fact, there's tons and tons and tons of them. Jordan Peterson, all these things, right? Call Me Daddy. Left. And what is the Nixon-Kennedy debate moment that I'm talking about? So in 1960, Richard Nixon debated John F. Kennedy on television, and it was a big deal because it was the first televised debate in the history of the United States. In 1960, television was still a relatively new medium, and television news was just picking up its importance. And this marked the transition of television from a young medium that is primarily for light entertainment and kind of like, it'll rot your eyes out, it's not good for you, to a medium that needs to be taken seriously for politicians. That was part of it. But the other part of it was that Kennedy and Nixon, when they debated on television that first time, the debate was also broadcast on radio. And those who listened on the radio overwhelmingly said that they felt that Nixon had won the debate and was the stronger candidate. Those who watched on television overwhelmingly said that they felt that Kennedy had won the debate and was the stronger candidate. Now, I don't want to get too much into the whys of it. For example, one of the big things was that Nixon was really struggling under the television lights. It was very sweaty, and just in general gave a unpleasant visual performance, whereas Kennedy understood the medium, and with his sort of like Hollywood looks and savvy, understood that how he presented himself on television was just as important as what he said. All right? So remember that. Remember that. How he presented himself in this new medium was just as important, maybe more, as what he said. More than, just as. Anyway. So, as we know, Kennedy went on to win the 1960 presidential election by a sliver, barely so, very, very close. Could have been a contested election, but it wasn't. A lot of people believe that the Chicago mafia political machine put it in the bag for Kennedy. Nixon chose not to contest the vote. And then, as we know, he became president himself 8 years later, doing much better on TV. So what am I talking about for this election cycle? What is that? History lesson, JJ? Well, yeah, maybe a little bit. So both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris did a number of, let's just stick with podcast appearances and interviews with popular podcasts. And they did it in very different ways. I'll start with Kamala. The Democrats approached the podcast world the same exact way they approach television, which is mostly with friendly audiences, friendly interviewers, right? Podcasts that are going to be friendly to them, or friendly to Kamala in this case, and coming in with your talking points. If you ever watch a politician, left or right, this is not unique to Democrats. They're all good at it. When they go on television, when they go on, especially it's even more evident when they go on lightweight TV like The View or like Steve Colbert or something like that. They just do this weird thing that we just accept, where no matter what question is asked of them, they give the answer that they want to give. So somebody says, well, okay, candidate J.J. Michaels, you voted against this education reform bill and your party supported it. How do you explain your position? And then candidate Michaels just says, kids are so important to our future, and there's nothing more important than the education of our children. And that's why we need to lower taxes so that we can put the power of the back into the, like, what? That has nothing to do with the question asked, but we just accept it because we're used to it. And that's how you do television. And you look nice and you look handsome and you do it. Gavin Newsom is the master at this. He's great, very handsome, very, very well spoken, very well presented. JD Vance on the right, he's really good at this. Handsome dude, put together well. He says what he wants to say. All right. But Kamala and the Democrats brought their television strategy into the podcast world. And here's the problem. That's not what flies in a podcast. What flies in a podcast, and especially in a long-form interview, like a 1-hour interview, is authenticity. And the reason why these podcasts are so popular, to the tune of tens of millions of listeners, is because just like us, right? Just like you and me and the J.J. Michaels family, we're having an open and honest conversation. And that's not how candidate Harris, Vice President Harris, approached even super friendly podcasts like Call Me Daddy. She did her talking points. She did it like a television interview, and it was ineffective. Remember, this is my prediction of the postmortem. That's what people are going to say. Trump, on the other hand, understood the medium and understood the differences between the medium, just like Kennedy understood television in a way that Nixon didn't. Trump understood that what you do on these podcasts is you just go in and you shoot the breeze. You just talk and you answer their questions. The Joe Rogan interview that Trump did, which if he wins, I think is going to be I'm predicting he wins, right? So maybe he's already been named the winner when you listen to this. Or maybe like JJ, so much for your predictions. You're an idiot. I think it's going to be pointed to. It's the most popular podcast in the world. The larger than any television audience you could ever have. And by any account, Trump's interview with Rogan was absolutely fascinating. Just totally fascinating. No matter what you think of the guy, you should listen to this interview. He's asked about, and answers candidly how it is that you pick a cabinet, why it is that it's so difficult to get non-career politicians involved in your cabinet, even if you're president, what the challenges are, what he would do differently, of course. They talk about aliens. They talk about it's a 3-hour conversation, and Trump just goes with it. And man, is it different than the crazy Trump persona that he does at his rallies, which is like, Comrade Kamala and blah, 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 the greatest. Everything I've ever done is the greatest. Even that's the greatest. That statement was like none of that. He just had a conversation. It's really similar to the old days when you would hear, Trump's a narcissist. He was all over the place all the time, right? You'd see him on, if you grew up in the Northeast, especially, you'd see him on Howard Stern. You'd see him like on the View. Actually, you'd see him on, he'd show up on Saturday Night Live at the talk shows, and he was the approachable billionaire. Now he's taken that persona, and he's the approachable president. He's the president. It's like fireside chat. Oh, that's another great example. FDR understood how you could use radio. He did the fireside chat. What that was once a week, FDR would just sit in, I guess he was sat by a fire, and he would do his radio address just from the living room of the White House or whatever. So that's the way Trump was approaching these podcasts, and it's fascinating. If you didn't listen to them, whether or not Trump wins, if you're interested in media and you're interested in media consumption, and if you're interested in communication as a theory, you should listen. It's very fascinating to hear a person who's reached the pinnacles of power have conversations like that. I mean, I'd love to hear Barack Obama or Bill Clinton. It's a little too late for Joe Biden. I don't think it'd be a very useful conversation, just being real with you. But I'd love to, it'd be fascinating to hear like a Barack Obama speak as candidly as Trump did about his time as president. And, the thing about Trump is he's clearly, actually don't know about Trump, because a lot of times what you have to, like at Trump's rallies, you listen to these speeches and you got to take it all with a grain of salt, because about 50% of what he's saying is just not true, or certainly massively exaggerated. In these podcast interviews, not just Joe Rogan, all the ones that he did, and he did a lot. He was doing them almost every day. Nobody did more. Nobody did more. Nobody did them better. It's the opposite of the rally persona. It's Trump, candid truth teller. It's the most open and honest. I know you don't believe this if you're like a Trump skeptic. I don't blame you. I didn't believe it either. The most open and honest ex-president that you could ever hear, just talking about how it really is. So, number one thing that people are going to be talking about after the surprise Trump win, not surprised that he won, although yes, but surprised at the magnitude of the win, is the new media, podcasts particularly, have had their moment. Now everybody's going to be saying that you got to master this medium, and they're correct. And it may go this way for a long time. And I got to tell you guys, what better way to get to know a candidate in the deep fake era, right, than to just listen to them talk for like 2 hours. You can't, I mean, I guess you could, but it's way harder to fake that than a soundbite. The pendulum's swinging back. It's correcting. In every way, by the way, it's swinging back. The power of in-person interactions. These Trump rallies, I mean, they're onto something, man. It's bigger in real life and also in politics. The power of long-form discussion. Because these are things that are harder to fake. And we live in a world where it's very difficult to believe what's real. We live in the silo, by the way. My last episode, which is my most listened to episode ever, by the way, as I predicted it would be, we're being eavesdropped and listened to all the time by all of our devices. This is true. I know I sound like a crank. Listen to the episode. And then what we already believe is regurgitated back to us, and it's fake. So long-form, real discussions have more power. And Trump understood that in a way the Democrats will catch up. They're smart people. It won't happen again. But just like Nixon figured it out, and the Republicans in the 60s figured out television, the Democrats will figure out how you do podcasts, and they'll do it better in 2 years in the midterm cycle. And the next Democrat candidate will do better at that 4 years from now. Maybe they'll even be on this show. Maybe the show will be huge by then. That'd be cool. All right, so that's one. Number two thing that everybody's going to be talking about is, as I already said, the vice presidential pick and debate was indeed consequential in this election. Now, this one's a big one for me because I said it all along, man. And it should have been obvious. I don't understand why this wasn't said more widely. When it was Trump versus Biden, what you had was two octogenarians, or about to be octogenarians, two men that will be 82 years old and 86 years old at the end of their terms, running for what could only be one 4-year term, because Trump had already served a 4-year term, so had Biden. So it seemed obvious to me that the vice presidential pick for both of these men, and particularly for Trump, because it was going to be Kamala for Biden, was particularly consequential because neither candidate could be a 2-term candidate by law. All right, well, then Biden's out, Kamala in, but it still didn't change because Trump still could only be a 1-term candidate for the same reasons. So, and the election is all about Trump. I mean, we all acknowledge that. Kamala's only primary position was not Trump. Kamala's primary position was Trump is a fascist. The cooperative mainstream press tried to get Kamala elected. Their main position is Trump is a literal Nazi. Trump is a fascist. Trump supporters are fascists. It was never about what Kamala wanted to do. It was always about who Kamala was not. And who she was not was Donald Trump. So the whole thing was about Trump, and Trump could only serve for 1 term. So the VP pick was very consequential. And Trump chose J.D. Vance. Very, very skilled, I think we now see. By the way, one of the things that's happened between my last podcast and this one is this whole notion that Trump is going to regret this J.D. Vance pick, which the left was trying to say. Yeah, then they saw this dude in action, and they saw him wipe the floor with Tim Walz, and they saw him do, 2-3 mainstream and hostile mainstream media appearances every day for months and just own it regardless of what you think about him. The dude, again, I compare him to Gavin Newsom. Whatever you think about Gavin Newsom, dude is slick. Dude knows his policy. Dude's a smart guy. He understands how to do TV. Same thing, J.D. Vance. If those guys square off head to head in 4 years, Vance versus Newsom, it is going to be a thing to behold. 2 very intelligent men that know their stuff, that are also very, very slick, for good and for ill, by the way. Should be a beautiful one. It'd be total opposite of the lowest common denominator campaigns that we've had with terrible debates or whatever. Those 2 would be really something. And yeah, so the Kamala campaign, the summer of joy and the momentum that she had when she took over for Biden, when they replaced the cadaver in chief with his young and vibrant vice president. Well, talking about Kamala Harris, well, that momentum, the beginning of the end was when it became clear what an atrocity of a pick Tim Walz was as the vice president. And here is the thing. The Democrats lost this election, I'm predicting, because with point 1, point 2, here's going to be the theme, because they were fighting last year's war. They were doing what worked in previous elections, whether it's how you approach an interview, right? I'm talking about the podcast thing here. Without recognizing what's changed. So everybody said, the VP pick never matters. It never matters. It's just symbolic. Yeah, but they went with that, and they did. And they went with the conventional wisdom, which was to balance the ticket. So you have a black woman, Indian woman, minority for sure, regardless of Indian black. Right? I don't want to get into this stupid thing. It's so stupid. Her dad is black and her mother's Indian. From San Francisco. So we've got a minority woman from San Francisco. Well, let's balance this with a presumably moderate white man from the Midwest, Tim Walz. Seems perfect, right? And it doesn't really matter all that much. Is this guy a good debater? What does it really matter? Who does it really matter? Well, it turned out to matter a lot because this particular election was different, and anybody could have seen that. I think anybody could have seen it. I've been saying it. Trump seemed to know it. Trump picked J.D. Vance, who could have beat him. And Kamala picked a weak and creepy dude who... Remember when they were trying to push... They were trying to say he had dad energy? And there was this little bit of time when they were trying to do Kamala and Tim Walz are your family. Fun anti-Kamala, and Tim Walz has the dad energy. Well, they backed off on it because it was failing miserably. Because I got to tell you, Tim Walz does not have dad energy. Tim Walz has your mom's creepy boyfriend energy. Tim Walz has America's mom is dating a new dude, and mom, seriously, you could do better than this guy. He's gross, and he's also like I caught him like looking at me in the shower or whatever. Like, he's disgusting. I'm sorry, Tim Walz that guy's creepy. Anybody can see it, and if you, it's ironic, by the way, that he was the one calling everybody weird, and they backed off on this because they recognized that this guy's dad energy is not the right kind of dad energy. All right. It's more like pervy stepdad energy. Nothing against all the stepdads out there. You're not pervy stepdads. He is. Terrible, terrible pick. And his performance at the debate, oh my God. He might as well have just said, hey, JD, you win. You win. I agree with everything this guy says. He's so much better. One way or the other, that really took the sails out of the wind out of the sails of the Kamala campaign. It really started to highlight the unseriousness of the campaign. And I think in retrospect, people are going to look back and say they should have known that the VP pick was consequential. Now, interestingly, the rumors coming out yesterday, I should cite this, but you can look it up. I can't remember where I read it. Somewhere on Ground News, by the way, were that Walz was the Obama's pick that they pushed, and that Joe Biden really wanted Governor Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, who was clearly not chosen because he's Jewish and because Kamala was really struggling with the anti-Semite wing of the Democrat Party, which is very powerful right now. They're very angry about Gaza, whatever. Old Joe's instincts might have been right on this one. We'll see, because if my prediction's correct that Trump won, then it probably means he won Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania will probably be close. And Josh Shapiro is a very popular liberal governor in a purple state, as they call it. And you got to believe that he could have delivered Pennsylvania for Kamala, which would have changed everything. Obama, evidently, advised Kamala to do the standard thing, which is to don't pick a VP that might outshine you, and do the conventional wisdom. Balance the ticket. This is what Joe Biden was to Obama when Joe Biden was vice president. He's not going to overshadow Obama, and he balances the ticket. This is what Kamala was to Joe Biden. Certainly not going to overshadow Joe Biden as vice president, and balances the ticket. This is what Tim Pence was to Donald Trump. Definitely not going to overshadow Donald Trump as his vice president, and balances the ticket. That's what they tried to do with Tim Walz. And the reason it didn't work was not because they were wrong, and Walz is a terrible politician. No, it's because that was last year's war. This was not the year to do that. This was one of the very rare years where the vice presidential candidate mattered. Okay. And that brings us, before we get to point 3, points 1 and 3, the first point, new media, podcasting. My last point, which I'm about to hit, those are things that I think are like new. The change in incumbency and the podcast, and those are probably going to continue for a while. The second one, this VP one, this is a one-off. It's a unique circumstance. I don't think that this is going to be a thing where all of a sudden the VP pick really matters in the future. It just did on this one. Okay, so that brings us to point 3, which is, I think we are seeing a trend in reverse incumbency, meaning, so incumbency obviously is, who's the candidate or the party in power. And typically in a election cycle, it's a huge advantage to be the party in power, right? So typically, Joe Biden would have had a massive advantage because he's already president, right? We're starting to see a trend internationally where incumbent governments are getting booted out of power left and right. And then the ones that replace them, then they get booted out of power. in parliamentary systems, like most of the other Western democracies have, it's a lot easier to do this. You can get votes of no confidence and things like this, and then they have to remake the government. I don't want to get into how parliamentary systems work, but suffice to say that we're seeing this pattern in France, in the UK, in Israel, in other places, the big Western democracies in Germany, where you have throw the bums out and then throw those bums out too. Throw those bums out. Bring the old bums back. Now throw those bums out. It's crazy, right? I think we're starting to see that trend here in the United States, where Trump lost because it was like, I don't like where the country's going. Get that guy out of here. And now I'm predicting Kamala loses, the Democrats lose, because like, well, we still don't like where they're going. Get that guy back. And I think that's a marker of tremendous dissatisfaction in the Western democracies and the populace of the Western democracies, and a tremendous reckoning that we're not handling very well of our identity in the West. Who are we? What is it that we stand for anymore? What do we believe in? And we're getting pulled to and fro by extreme positions because they're appealing, because we don't know what we are. We're like as Westerners, we're like a college student that doesn't really, have, a college student, a freshman in college, right? Doesn't quite figure out who they are yet. And they're easily kind of like pulled in one direction, pulled in the other direction, changing their identity every couple months. That's kind of where we're at. And we're susceptible to this type of thing because we don't have any grounding. Topic for a different day. But the outcome of that reality, I believe, is that incumbency is an albatross as opposed to a strength. And what that means is that yet again the Democrats were fighting yesterday's war. They were running last year's election, if that makes sense. What Trump did that was savvy on this one was he yet again painted himself as the outsider, and they painted Kamala as the incumbent president. And she did not do a good job of saying, hang on a second, that was Joe Biden's presidency. She was between a rock and a hard place on it, because the reality is she had very little to do with any decision-making in the Biden presidency, but that was also her main qualification for being the presidential candidate to begin with. So what's she going to do? She's going to say, I didn't really actually do anything? Then people would say, well, then what's your qualification for being president? Like, why are you any better than any other candidate? Or is she going to say, which she actually did say, I was the last one in the room. I was very involved in these policies. Okay, well, we want to throw the bums out, so you're going out with them. 28% of the country, as of the last poll on Friday, averaged polls, NBC News reported this, 28% of the country said that they see the United States as heading in the right direction. That's really, really bad for the incumbents. Now, Kamala probably could have painted herself as an outsider. It would have been hard, but the bottom line is the Democrats shouldn't have picked Kamala. They kind of had to. I talked about this in an early podcast. They sort of had to because they would have had a revolt, I think, at least initially, among their female base and their minority base. I think black voters and particularly black women would have justifiably been like, what do you got to do around here to get a shot at the presidency? The vice president not good enough? And that would have been a fair position, but I think the more politically savvy long-term decision would have been to pick somebody seen as an outsider that could criticize Biden and Trump. And I think that the enmity for Trump is deep enough on the left that in the end, those voters would have gotten over it. I think that they would have been very offended that Kamala was not anointed, but I think they would have gotten over it when push came to shove and still opposed Trump. But I think that more of an outsider candidate would have not been as burdened by incumbency. What is it that Kamala says? Don't be burdened by what the burdens of the past are or whatever, burdened by what may be, but what will be or whatever. Well, Kamala was burdened by what was, and what was the Biden-Harris administration. And even if they had done a wonderful job, I think the reality is that the zeitgeist of the Western democracies right now is throw the bums out. And I think it's going to be that way for a little while. Now, assuming that I'm correct that Trump won, he's only in for 4 years. So we're going to have no income. Well, we'll have a party, an incumbent party, if I'm right about Trump. We'll have an incumbent party in 4 years. But Trump is such an outlier that whoever is the Republican candidate, I think, will not have a difficult time painting themselves as not Trump, because only Trump is Trump. Now, if it's J.D. Vance, as I think it will be, he might struggle a little bit more because they're ideologically similar, and he's Trump's vice president and has been a very powerful surrogate for him, and probably will be for the next 4 years, assuming they do win. But we'll see. Anyway, I'm going to post this tonight. That's enough, right? That's enough. I'm going to do another one tomorrow. I want to post this tonight. I'm going to do another one tomorrow. I'm going to be on the road. I'm going to be traveling Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But I have set up you might have noticed, I think it sounds good, but I've set up a more simplified recording chain so that I can potentially do some of these on the road if like the news is coming in hot and heavy, and post these as I travel. I just want to leave that open as a possibility. Might be something worth doing. But we'll see. But I'm definitely going to do another one tomorrow. And we'll talk about what's happened in the election. Whatever happens, whoever your preferred candidate is, I want to remind you of the words of the great Jon Stewart. I talked about this also earlier, a few months ago. The reality is, America will go on. It's not over. Whoever wins tomorrow, assuming we find out tomorrow, I assure you it's not going to be the last election. I assure you we're not going to become a communist country. I assure you we're not ushering in American fascism. They're just telling you that because you're a product, and they need to sell things to you, and they need to control you, and they need you to be excited, and they need you to keep tuning in. And nobody tunes in for this is just the same thing. The parties are basically the same. Don't worry, nothing changes. Yeah, it doesn't get people to buy soap, and it doesn't get people to listen to podcasts. Does it get you to listen to mine? If it does, then share it with some people. Let's grow this thing, man. All right. Love you guys. I'm glad to be back. I hope you're glad to have me back. I'll see you tomorrow, and good luck. God bless America.